Welcome to the Redeeming Stories podcast, a space for honest, grace-filled conversations about healing, resilience, and renewal. I'm your host, Julie M. Lane, and today's guest is Heidi McBain, a therapist and coach who supports women through major transitions of motherhood, pregnancy, postpartum, and perimenopausal. Heidi navigates these seasons alongside moms who may be struggling with identity, exhaustion, and the invisible weight that so often comes with caring for others. As the holidays draw near, many women find themselves caught between joy and depletion, holding gratitude in one hand and overwhelm in the other. So, in this episode, we'll talk about what it means to honor both. Together, we'll explore the emotional realities of motherhood, the importance of support and self-compassion, and how healing can unfold across every stage of a woman's life. This is the Redeeming Stories podcast, and today we're reflecting on the seasons of motherhood and the hope that grows quietly within them. So Heidi, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
You mind sharing a bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. I am a wife and mom. I've been married for 23 years, and we have two kids. One's in college now, and the other is in high school. We also are cat and dog parents as well, so I feel like that sometimes just adds some excitement to life. We have a dog, Lily, and a cat, Sylvester. And then professionally, I own a therapy private practice here in the state of Texas, and I also do some coaching work as well, and it's focused all on women. Most of the women I see are either in pregnancy, postpartum, or perimenopause.
Wonderful, thank you. I visited your website and read a bit about your story there, and you shared that your own motherhood experiences inspired the work that you do now. What moments or
absolutely.
realizations led you to merge your personal story with your professional calling?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us that, especially in the perinatal period and doing work in this perinatal period of pregnancy and postpartum, it's often informed by our own stories. So earlier in my career, I did a lot of work with families and couples and kids and teens. And then after my own, sometimes hard, sometimes even traumatic emergence into motherhood, I choosing a different path to focus on professionally. I would say with my first, I had pretty easy pregnancy. I had a pretty traumatic birth. I would say I didn't even realize kind of how traumatic the birth was until after the birth of my second, which was pretty easy. And it was like, oh, okay, that was kind of a night and day difference. And then, my own story, I had a pretty late miscarriage between my daughter and my son. And so, that took a lot, to work through and to be ready to get pregnant again. And then I would say for most of us, that have had miscarriages or pregnancy loss, the pregnancy after that loss tends to have a lot of heightened anxiety. And so what I didn't realize, and I mean, this is, years ago at this point, but what I didn't realize, and I think our field didn't realize at the time, was how you can treat anxiety during pregnancy, which is what I was doing. I had my own therapist and did a really good job of, working through the grief after the miscarriage and working through the anxiety in that pregnancy. But there was no awareness around postpartum anxiety. And so, I would say most of the postpartum period with my son, I had very heightened anxiety that I think, was kind of a carryover from the pregnancy and the miscarriage, but also because we had some hard stuff with him Had to go to the emergency room at 3 weeks because he stopped breathing, and was thankfully okay. But my husband and I joke, like, we didn't sleep for like 9 months until until the reflux was gone and he was sitting up on his own. But I just think, based on my own experience, with training and in the therapy field now, is we really educate women that if you have heightened anxiety during pregnancy, you may want to be on the lookout and checking in, or even just continuing with therapy into postpartum. Whereas my own therapist, who I loved, like right before my son was born, we closed out, right? I was ready. So once he was born, right, it's like all the anxiety was supposed to be gone, and that wasn't the case at all. But so I think for a lot of us, kind of in this perinatal field, we have a lot of our own experiences. And now, that I'm in perimenopause, and a lot of my clients have stayed with me and are also in perimenopause. It's a completely different ballgame with, managing our own hormones, emotions, midlife crises, and also raising kids at the same time. Can you hear me? The microphone's out. Okay.
Yeah, my apologies.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was like, oh no, your mouth is moving. I didn't catch any of that. If you want to back up for a minute. Thanks.
Absolutely. So I can identify with your story from the standpoint of my two daughters' births were very different. One was very labor intensive, and the other was very short labor. And that experience was completely, it was just so different. I thought, okay, with the second one, this was easy. Why couldn't the first one be like this? And also feeling very much alone because I was in a relationship that was not supportive, was more irritated with me while I was in labor, and that he was hungry, he didn't want to be there, he wanted to leave, and so forth, and never really had that connection with him with the birth of either of my children. But then in turn, I can see where our knowledge has really changed the field about what families need. As a special education professional for 30 years, I don't know how many new moms I talked to who had a child with disabilities, and what does that look like? And then as their children grew and had many milestones that were not met, how do we continue to support them with that anxiety of feeling that they had done something wrong to create a child with disabilities? So I understand why, there are people like you, and why I've been educated by all of you that I need to refer these parents back to a therapist who can work through those issues with them. So the work you're doing is really incredible, and we didn't know it back when we were having children.
Right.
So this often unseen or a misunderstood concept, it's one of those, I don't want to say disability, but it's hidden. It's not something we can
Right.
see. What are some of the emotional realities you see most often, especially, during this very tender season in life and season of the holidays?
Yeah, I would even piggyback off of what you were saying for a second, that, with anxiety, so often we find grief as well. And so, if your child has a disability, or just, maybe isn't the child you're expecting to be raising, there tends to be so much grief in motherhood as well, right? It's sort of like we have to grieve the kids we thought we were going to have so that we can raise the kids in an emotionally connected way that we actually do have. And so to answer your question, I see a lot of grief in my practice too, and I think sometimes grief and like depression or postpartum depression show up in very similar ways, that sometimes the deeper work is like the symptoms may be somebody's crying and has depressed mood, and their eating and their sleep are different than usual, but kind of when we get underneath there, we're often finding grief. Sometimes trauma too can be part of it, especially like I was talking about, and you were as well, like this place of birth trauma can be really tricky. And then talking about the holidays too, I think for most of us, especially with first baby, there's a lot of transition into motherhood, but there are a lot of kind of outer transitions as well. So, the holiday season may look different. I mean, I can share my own story. Before my husband and I had kids, we used to rotate Thanksgiving, right, and Christmas, right? And once we had kids, we said, you know what, we're not going to be traveling right now. Like, if people want to come to us, great. But we're going to start setting up our own traditions. And so, especially for like Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, we really try to be at our own home doing our own thing. And then we may travel later Christmas Day or the day after, or people may come in. But it's stuff that we buffered when our kids were really, really young that have continued. And so I think sometimes that's kind of a surprise for people, right? Is you have a certain way of doing things before kids, and then you bring kids in, and it's like, ooh, some of this stuff maybe isn't going to work so well, or maybe hadn't been working well for a while, but nobody wanted to rock the boat. So the holidays are definitely complicated for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I find that with my own daughters. I now have three very young grandsons, and my daughters geographically live a few hours apart from each other and probably always will because of career choices. But this is the first year one of my daughters can't travel, and she's very concerned about not offending people, hurting my feelings.
Yeah.
And all I can do is continue to reassure her that this is part of growing families. You shouldn't feel any pressure to do something that is not in your space right now to do. It's not where your family is, and that's okay.
Right, it's like normalizing it for her, and also reassuring her that nobody's gonna think differently of her if she's prioritizing her family first.
Yeah, and that's what she should be doing. Yet I'm also reflective of in-laws and other extended family members who do put pressures on moms during the season and at certain times in my own life of having to adhere to something that just didn't feel right, and created more anxiety. So do you have thoughts on how to support moms in those kinds of situations?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, it can be really tricky to navigate our own families, let alone a family you marry into. So I would say ideally, if you're able to navigate your own family and your partner's able to navigate theirs, the hope is that they can be a buffer for you so that you don't have to be in the middle of everything. But sometimes that's tricky too, right? Because sometimes partners want certain things that are in alignment with their family, and you want certain things that aren't in alignment. And so the other thing I would say is that there tends to be a lot of negotiation, and so if you can start those conversations, even if they're difficult when your kids are young, the hope is that, you'll have, more places to go maybe with these conversations, or more of a baseline to build off of. I would say the other thing, is as your kids get older, like they may have more of a say in certain things too. I always find it funny, like as our kids have gotten older, we're like, oh, we can like travel now. We don't have to be home, and one of them digs in and is like, no, this is what we've always done. Like, we need to be home for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, right? Or even we tried traveling for Thanksgiving, and they were both like, well, we miss our traditional Thanksgiving meal. Like, it wasn't the same just eating at some restaurant while we were traveling. And so I do think, what we're talking about is that extended family, like the stuff outside of the family. But there's also, as your kids get older, there's negotiation within the family too, right? So I think it's, it's like, how do you give enough that you can meet people in the middle, but not so much that you lose yourself in the process? And I think it's a really tricky balance, in that everybody has to figure that out for themselves, right? Is that we don't want everybody polarized and dug in around what they want, but we also don't want one person always giving in to somebody else. That's not fair either.
Right, and that latter piece is what I can identify with, of relationships, that this is how we do things with my family, and your family doesn't count, and this is how we're going to do things moving forward in a community and in a space where I was feeling loneliness, rejection, working really hard to be invisible. And, and then you're balancing that sense of womanhood, of helping out in the kitchen and trying to be part of something, and I'm not. So when families, especially women, when we come into in-laws, an extended family, and we have children to manage, especially really young ones, how do we feel that we're contributing to that tradition? How do we know when to step back and set our boundaries to protect ourselves while still balancing children and a significant other?
Yeah. I would say, depending on the person, I mean, know what your priorities are, right? So if your top priority is to make sure that your own kids have a great time, then that's your top priority. So maybe you don't end up spending time in the kitchen, and other people may be upset about that, or maybe you prepare something ahead of time, right? And it's staying in your own truth, right, around what matters most, and setting boundaries around, like, what are your issues and what are other people's. So sometimes it's like imagining there's like this invisible boundary around you and other people, and so it's like, okay, I'm feeling some discomfort, right? Is that mine because, maybe I'm, anxious about something, or is it I'm feeling discomfort because somebody wants me doing something that isn't actually within my truth here, right? And so it's like that needs to stay on the other side of this boundary, right? So in this case, it might be, maybe I'm going to prepare a dish ahead of time, and I'm going to be focused on the children and making sure they're having a great time. And if people have a problem with that, they can have a problem with that, right? But it's like, kind of heart-centered. I know what my own truth is in here, and that's what's most important to me. And sometimes, like, I'll have clients do, like, hey, hand on heart, take a deep breath, remind yourself, where you are, and yourself better.
I wish I had had that advice. I think that my priority was always my daughters, but I think that incredible need to be needed just was such a heavy burden for me to always carry, while making sure that my daughters were still enjoying their time with that in-law family.
Yeah, well, it's so much to balance, right? Because you're trying to balance your own needs with everybody else's. So we're saying, given this list of, 5 things, 10 things, what's most important, and how do you stay true to that first and foremost? But we're also not saying it's easy.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think it's easier for some than for others. It's just all of those other people in your world that you have no control over, and you can't change them. And it's a setting that is unchangeable, and you just learn to survive in it. So when you think about the work that you've been doing, Heidi, what's that common thread, between pregnancy, postpartum, and perimenopausal that common thread of hope and healing that you see as women move through those transitions in their lives?
Yeah. I would say the first thing before we get to hope and healing is there's some interesting things that we see kind of with women with maybe PMS or PMDD, so anything that's maybe showing up before a period, to how mental health type stuff shows up in pregnancy and postpartum. And then right, we're seeing some of the similar things in perimenopause, right? So it's women may be angry, irritable, agitated, they just don't feel like themselves, right? And so we're kind of seeing these threads throughout a woman's life. And so to me, the first thing is like, how do we normalize, like, hey, you're not alone on this island. Like, many of us are experiencing this same thing. And then I would say, that place of hope and healing is one, like the education around it, right? And again, this reminder, like, hey, as women, this is a really normal thing that you're going through. But also, you get underneath the symptoms so that we can find you again in there. And I think so much of like the hope and the healing is around women like coming back to themselves again, like feeling centered and grounded and present in the here and now, in who they are, in being able to give to others, but also receiving help back as well, right? Which as givers tends to be one of the like most uncomfortable things for us, is like, what do you mean I need to receive help back? So I think so often it's like, like them regaining their sense of self in here. And some people are able to do that with young kids. For some people, it comes kind of later in motherhood, or sometimes it like comes and goes, right? But I mean, I think ultimately I like to describe it as like the chaos of life out here can just be going, but can you be centered and grounded in yourself, that you're not going to get swept up into it? Or can you know your own truth and know yourself well enough that we can drop you into any situation and you're not going to get lost in there, right? Versus I feel very comfortable with certain people and in certain situations, but you take those people away, or you take my safety net away and put me somewhere else, I'm going to lose myself. Is to say, well, what if in any given situation you feel such a sense of self, and you are coming from a place of empowerment and feeling centered and grounded, that we can put you in a different situation and know you'll be fine. And I think it's I used the word empowering earlier, but I think it is like ultimately very empowering for people to say, wow, look at me, right? I can go into the situation that a year ago I never would have been able to do, and be who I am and not be so caught up in external validation or how other people see me, but coming from a place of self-love and self-worth and self-value.
Exactly. And I know that's been part of my healing journey recently with my therapist, of doing things that I've always been too afraid to do because I think I would be too vulnerable, or I would stand out in a crowd, and I've been so used to being invisible. So as you were talking, I was thinking about, for people who may have experienced trauma or abuse, or who are depressed, how does this fit in with someone who has denied their feelings for decades, and yet their body's going through these phases of life, and you just deny that those emotions exist and you push them away? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think we're gonna be finding, like, the more that research is starting to finally focus on women in perimenopause and menopause, I think the more information we're going to get in this area, and I think it's very exciting. I think it's still coming, and so I think as therapists, we want to look at the whole person like physically, mentally, emotionally, sometimes spiritually, if that fits for people. And, really be able to see, like, wow, if they're complaining a lot about belly pain and they've gone to the doctors and they've done all the tests and, according to their physical, everything looks fine medically, are you maybe somatically holding certain emotions in your belly that we could release or help you release? And so I think there's going to be a lot more research on that. Again, the more, it's, I don't know, I feel like there's this wave that's like sort of coming right now with like perimenopause and, and information and things that have kind of been under the surface for a while, that now people are like, yeah, like I don't feel good in this period of life, and so what are we going to do about it? And so I think it's going to be really important to have therapy along with really good services for women in this time period.
No, that's great. And that's that sense of hope, that research is
Yeah.
coming. And as a published researcher myself, I know that the value of research is incredible, but it takes so long to get it out
Yeah.
into written form
So
and
true. So
to
true.
demonstrate its validity and its reliability. So, Heidi, as we wind up our time today, for the moms who are listening right now, who feel maybe unseen, tired, numb, or stretched thin, what truth or encouragement would you want her to carry with her after this conversation?
Yeah, I think just really simply, like, I would want her to know that she's not alone. And, kind of that analogy we used earlier, but that a lot of people feel like they're just on an island by themselves and that nobody gets it and nobody understands. Like, to be able to say, like, you are not on this island by yourself. You are not alone in this. And that, many of us understand it on a personal level, and many of us can also be helpful on a professional level as well.
Okay, well, thank you, Heidi. And as we close this episode, I'm thinking about the reminders you had about motherhood being made up of many seasons, some tender, some loving, some tiring, but they're all sacred in some way. And, during the holidays, it can be easy to measure our worth by how much we give or how well we hold everything together. That's an incredible gift most women have. But healing often begins when we remember that being present, even if it's imperfect, is enough. So, whether you're in the early days of motherhood, navigating transition, or simply trying to find yourself again, may you know that your story still holds beauty. So, Heidi, thank you for your heart, your wisdom, and your willingness to name what so many feel. And thank you, listeners, for being part of this conversation. So until next time, this is Redeeming Stories Podcast. And may you find rest in the midst of it all, the holiday season, grace in your own becoming, and quiet hope in this season. Thank you for joining.